Hi guys, you know what kryptonite for a terrible Tory is? It's a good journalist. And a good journalist is somebody who doesn't simply move on to the next question, but properly grills an MP over something false or stupid that they spewed. Wilfred Frost from Sky News is one of those great journalists. Now, he sat down with Mel Stride, the current Shadow Chancellor and former Secretary of State for the DWP, where he pushed back, and rightly so, on a typical Tory talking point. The old fastest growing nation in the G7. Stride struggled here to recover when called out. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did.
Welcome back to Breakfast to the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride. Mel, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Will. Good morning.
Let's start with the welfare reforms that were announced yesterday by the government. Are these broadly things that you think you will be voting in favour of?
So we're going to have to look more closely at the detail on that. But look, let's be clear. This has been rushed. There was no mention even in the Labour Party manifesto, for example, about changes to the PIP benefit. Labour have fought shy on welfare because it's deeply divisive within their own ranks. They've suddenly come to it late in the day because the Chancellor has killed the economy stone dead with her budget last October and now needs to find some money for her emergency budget next Wednesday. So that's what's going on here. And I'm afraid that doesn't make for good policy, particularly in the area of welfare, where you do need to take your time and to be thoughtful about it.
This has been rushed.
Yes.
I mean, so the norm for your party is what? A year per policy? When are we actually going to get
Oh my goodness, like what the Tories do is they sit on the sidelines and say, hey, you haven't introduced a policy. Why haven't you introduced a policy? We need a policy now. Where is your plan? You don't have a plan. And then as soon as the Labour government introduce a policy, it's like, hey, you rushed this through. You need to take your time. We're going to introduce our policies sometime in the future. Or as Will pointed out here, was it one policy per year?
policy?
Well, no, you say it's been
I'll come back to the welfare statement.
No, on the welfare. Well, you're talking more generally about policy, or
yeah,
we're
because
sticking
I
with
just
welfare?
think it's we'll come back to the welfare, but I just think it's they've been in government for 8 months. There's an argument to say whether they should have put it in the manifesto or not, but this is an issue that you broadly support. You want to reform welfare payments.
Yes, of course. But my point is there's a way of going about it. So when I was Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, I brought in fundamental reforms to welfare, which save £5 billion across the forecast period. And the OBR said will mean 450,000 fewer people, almost 500,000 fewer people, going on to those long-term sickness benefits. Now, the way you do that is you think very deeply, you consult very widely, and you put together a policy that is fair to taxpayers and also protects the vulnerable. What we've seen here is a scrabbling around at the last minute. They were going to make an announcement at one point, then it got delayed again, and then the Health Secretary said it hadn't even been discussed in Cabinet and so on. This has been shambolic, and it's been lashed together with a deadline of next Wednesday when they have to show some savings, because the Chancellor has killed growth in this country stone dead. Well, that's the root of the issue here.
Well, we're not in recession. We can come to the economy more broadly.
I didn't say recession, but there is no growth. There's no growth in the economy.
So which is it, a recession or no growth?
Nor was there for most of the last
Well, we had the fastest growing economy in the G7 when the government took over.
For a 6-month period, following a 6-month period where you were in recession.
Yeah,
which is
we had about the highest level of employment. We had very low...
He keeps selling this thing. He keeps pushing this point. The Tories keep pushing this point. We had the fastest growing nation in the G7. And as Will rightly pointed out here, yes, after 6 months of a downturn. So if you started low, well, the only way is up. So of course you're going to be the fastest growing nation if you're starting from the last position or near the last position.
Levels of unemployment
Unemployment's hardly moved since they've come to power. We can come to that in a moment.
Well, we were talking about our record, not what's happened since. What's happened since is growth has been...
Was there a recession under the last Rishi Sunak government? Is there a recession now?
The important thing is we went through a cost of living crisis.
Answer me that question. Did you have a recession? Is there a recession now?
So, look, what we're talking about is the general level of growth.
Was there a recession
on the issue of growth?
Sorry. Was there a recession under Rishi Sunak? Has there been a recession under this government?
So what matters, Wilf, is that
the non-answer,
what you were talking about.
Exactly, the non-answer. That's all you're going to get from the Tories, the non-answer. See, what the Tories tried to do is they tried to say, we had the fastest growing nation in the G7. Okay, what happened before that? Was there a recession? No, we're not going to talk about recessions. They don't want to talk about recessions when they were in power. They want to talk about recessions when other people are in power. And then when there is a downturn, well, the automatic response to this is, well, it's nothing to do with us. See, it's the pandemic, or it was the war in Ukraine, or it's global factors. So when things are going badly, nothing to do with the Tories. When things are improving, we have to thank the Tories. We have to give Mel Stride and Rishi Sunak and Kemi Badenoch and others a pat on the back. Well done. You know, the fastest growing nation in the G7. When things are going badly, nothing to do with the Tories. This is the line that they constantly sell. And it's important that journalists call it out, push back on it. And that's what we're seeing here with Wilfred Frost. You need to push back on this because this is a narrative that has been sort of set in stone. Fastest growing nation in the G7, no mention of recessions. No mention of any downturn. No bad times because the Tories rely on people having bad memories. They're hoping that when the next election turn comes around, people will forget what the Tories had done when they were in power. I know it's impossible to imagine at this moment, but people do have short memories. And remember, I've said before, there's a real possibility. It's a remote one, but there's still a possibility that somebody like Boris Johnson could come back. Boris Johnson himself could come back and lead the Conservatives because people have short memories. They forget how bad things were. People forgot how bad things were under Donald Trump and they voted him back into power. So the Tories are sort of relying on the media not really pushing back, and that's why it's so important that they do.